Have you ever stared at an IEM that was so beautiful that all you can say is, damn? Well, that's pretty much Kinera's entire lineup, aside from the Pandemon. We don't talk about that. But since Kinera has some new stuff on the way, I wanted to revisit some of their older IEMs, and looks aside, do they actually sound good? Well, starting with their Celeste series, these follow a V-shaped type of sound, or more specifically the PHOENIXCALL. Very engaging, exciting, aggressive, sometimes too aggressive, but you know, very energetic sound. Low end texture is solid, the tactility is there, the note weight and texture is there, it's well controlled and doesn't bleed into the rest of the frequency. It's not going to slam like a monster, it's not a bass headset, but it's good. However, the same can be said when it comes to the vocals. The vocals are too shouty for me on both the PHOENIXCALL and the Dark Phoenix. The extra 1.5k peak pushes the vocals too forward, and combined with the upper mids and triple energy, it just makes the vocals sound a bit too sharp and a bit too fatiguing at longer listening periods. It's very evident with genres like K-pop, J-pop, EDM, where tracks have a little bit too much energy. The electric guitars and female vocals aren't smooth. Again, very aggressive and energetic sounding. But even so, the treble on both the PHOENIXCALL and the Dark Phoenix is actually pretty well extended. The transients are more sharp than airy, lots of small treble details, you know, good resolution at its price, and the overall imaging is precise and sharp in the attack and the location, but just a little bit too sharp at times. I like the Dark Phoenix more because the extra bit of bass helps balance out the energy from the vocals and the treble, but neither are high volume sets. They don't scale too well, and more of a mid to lower volume listening experience. The Plutus Beast, on the other hand, is probably my least favorite out of the bunch. It looks amazing, the prettiest out of the three in my opinion, but the combination of the forward vocals plus the dark treble puts it in a weird spot, since you can't really crank them up too high because of the extra, you know, 1.5k region, but at mid volume it also sounds dark and a bit congested because of the lack of like triple extension, while the vocals are more pushed, more forward, and takes more of the headspace. It is very vocal centric, but I think it's a bit too much and it doesn't sound that good at mid volume. But if you do want like a V-shaped type of sound, I would personally grab the Dark Phoenix. Next, we have the LOKI, my favorite Kinera IEM that I heard so far. Super clean with great head stage, you know, white and deep, beautiful treble presentation, not too airy, very clean, where you know it doesn't get soft, but it doesn't get overly sharp either. Just resolving enough that you get all the information while not being too like jarring and getting too much. If I were to describe the LOKI in one word, it would be like water. You know, it's very clean. There's also a good amount of low end, great texture and separation, slams nicely without taking over the rest of the playback. It's not going to be the main star of the show, but it does its job very well. Now, aside from the clean treble and the well-controlled bass, I think where the LOKI really shines is in its mid-range. The LOKI's layering is not that flat type of soundstage like the U12T, but more 3D because the vocals are, you know, pushed in more, you know, while there's enough air and space for elements to play around it, so it creates that kind of like 3D staging where there's vocals, and then in the back there's like, you know, the bass and then the treble. The 1.5k boost is definitely noticeable. Vocals are evidently more forward, and combined with the clean treble, you get to hear the micro nuances in the voices and just like the small details. Although at higher volumes this can be an issue with certain songs, as the vocals are just like, you know, more forward, and if the vocals on certain songs are too forward combined with the forward vocals on the LOKI, then it gets too much, so they don't scale as well as some of the other sets. But even with the more forward vocals, I don't get the same close-in type of feeling from the vocals, like the boosted 1.5k region, as I do on the Plutus Beast, for example. The vocals are more forward, yes, but it's also well extended and open. Again, the treble air is good, the staging is very open. It's kind of like the RS5 in a way, but cleaner. If the vocals on the RS5 is like getting blasted by, you know, a powerful beam of light, then the LOKI is like getting blasted under like a clean waterfall. It's just a very clean and clear vocal presentation. It's great at mid volume. Now versus the Verdandi, which is probably one of the most beautiful IEMs I've ever seen. Just check out my short. Imbalance aside, because yes, you do still get imbalances with a 1k plus IEM. Sound wise, the Verdandi is a less engaging and exciting version of the LOKI, so like a younger brother. It has less bass and treble from both ends, not as spacious, more closed in, and follows a similar clean type of sound with the same amount of like 1.5k boost. The vocals are still forward, but it does even have a little bit more energy in the upper mids now because of the 5k boost. But before we move on, this video is sponsored by you guys. You guys know the drill. I buy most of my stuff to try and stay as unbiased as possible, but again, I don't have the most money in the world. Lately, I've been getting like low-key blacklisted by a lot of the companies. If you found my review guides and replies to be helpful, feel free to become a channel member. It's only $5 a month, and I do regular giveaways there. But back to the video. The Verdandi is pretty much Harman 2019 but with more forward vocals, and the overall head stage also feels less open versus the LOKI, which makes the vocal feels even more forward than the LOKI. Now aside from the skull, which we'll talk about later, the vast majority of the Kinera IEMs are meant for mid-volume listening, which is fine since the vast majority of people don't listen at super high volumes like me. But even still, for most tracks, I think the Verdandi needs either more air to open up the sound more, or less 1.5K, less 5K, and push back the vocals a bit and not make it too forward. Now this clean and more forward vocal presentation does have its upside. It works very well with genres that don't have a lot of energy, like indie, acoustics, and ballads. That's more forgiving when it comes to cymbals and just like sharper sounds like electric elements in general, as they usually don't have a lot of those or any on those tracks. But even then, the vocals can still get a little bit congested on certain songs like Paselo Diaz, which is a slow ballad acoustic. Here Natalia's vocals are close to the listener, but also there's less air in the mixing, and just the production of the track in general doesn't have that much like stage, or air, you can say, which puts a lot of emphasis on the singer. And if an IEM is very forward in its vocal presentation combined with the quote unquote intimate production, then the overall sound can feel very in your head and not as open. It's definitely intimate, sure. For those who like that feeling of being right next to the singer, then the Verdandi would be a solid pick. However, the 5K peak is still an issue where at higher volumes the vocals can get shouty, especially any consonants like pts, which is why the Verdandi is like a more mid-volume set. Essentially what you're paying for jumping from the Verdandi to the LOKI is the extra treble extension and the air that provides a more open sound, as well as less 5K for a smoother vocal playback and a little more bass. But this is a tough sell given that the LOKI is $2,000 more, and in this current market there's also the Mark IIIs, the Hype 10, or the RS5 that if you want like more forward vocals. Although they aren't as clean and refined as the LOKIs, they do have better vocal presentation, better soundstage and bass texture when you compare them to the Verdandi overall. So if I had the choice between the Verdandi and like the Monarchs and stuff like that, I would get the Mark IIIs or the Mark IIs or even the Hype 10s, and if I wanted more forward vocals, I would get the RS5. The LOKI are a little bit better than all of those, but they are over $3,000, so very high diminishing returns. It's a little bit of a shame because the Verdandi is a very beautiful IEM. Like if it had more air and less 5K, I think it would have been a nice set, even at its price, right? But as for now, this is like more of a collector's piece, meaning if you want to buy it for the craftsmanship and the looks alone, I can't stop you. I get it. The design do be designing. But moving on, finally we have the SKULD. Ah yes, the more V-shaped plunge. Now in a vacuum, the SKULD sounds pretty good, very juicy mids, good bass texture, and scales pretty well, but I'm not sure if it's $550 worth of well. Similar to the plunge, the SKULD is a mid-centric set that has a unorthodox vocal presentation. Again, very tame, close to none, but the treble extension is better versus the plunge, and it doesn't feel as like congested when it comes to the smaller details and the treble extension. Now you still miss some information because of the tamer sound as well as the peaks and dips, but it's just less now compared to the plunge. I wouldn't recommend listening to the SKULD at mid to lower volumes because, well, you can't really hear the vocals or the treble at that volume, so crank them up since they do scale pretty well, and that's when you'll really notice the sound to just open up. So when you listen to the SKULD on its own and you get used to its tuning, it's very enjoyable, a warm neutral sound without much harshness, pretty immersive because you can crank them up, and a little bit more like engaging than the plunge. But as soon as you AB it to something like the Nova or an IEM with a more traditional vocal presentation, treble extension, that's when you'll really notice the small flaws and you really notice how much information and like openness and extension you are actually missing. Compared to the Nova or the LM, the vocals and treble on the SKULD doesn't feel as resolving, as extended. It lacks the detail because of the tamer tuning, and since it's got a good amount of mid bass as well without much air or the upper mids, the SKULD by default feels warmer, more close in, not as open, quote unquote more intimate. Is it a fun tuning to have in your collection? Sure, but I wouldn't pay $550 for it. Maybe for the same price as the Nova, or like max $200 as like a nice little side grade to hear some of the like different type of sounds, because it is still enjoyable if you just like shut off your brain and listen, right? But at $550, you can definitely get much better resolution and tuning these days. But yeah, very beautiful IEMs. Some of the tunings are, questionable, but they are still very solid IEMs, and I hope this video was helpful. But that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one. Shout out to Jeff Young, RoarX Cat, Dom Q, Gatamino Baldo, Star Buccaneers, Joel Pink, Wipe Your Buttocks, The Skull Status, B_Urac, Mystic Spoon Attack, Cyborg, Oh Really, Walker Standard, User _YT_158, Ernest, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Patrick, Bellcell, Kel, Rosa the Calf, Perijat, Polly, Mr. Gorillas, Anto, and Gis Seung Yon. I'm sorry if I butchered any of your names, but thank you guys so much for the support.